Well, welcome everyone for our April meetup, Ionic meetup. Thanks for coming. Thanks for Ionic for providing the food tonight, and also MTech for the wonderful facilities, and thanks everyone for coming. We've got some good presentations tonight. We'll just start though, just briefly, maybe we can go around the room, quickly introduce ourselves. If you work for a company and you're hiring, let the group know. If you're looking for work, internship, or whatever, maybe just bring that up, and it's a great time to network. So my name is Brett Palmer, and I'm one of the organizers here. I've worked with Todd. Todd and I go back to Novell days, a long time ago. I also run the DevOps meetup that meets the second Wednesday of the month. We had Salt Lake City DevOps Days, so just a plug for that. But I do some Ionic development on the side, but mostly I'm an infrastructure manager, and I work for the state of Utah, contract with the state of Utah, and we're doing a lot of cloud computing stuff. So it's all kind of related and all a lot of fun. So why don't we start with that? Why don't we just start from the front, go to the back?
Sure. My name is Kevin Warner. I'm currently a student in tech here. Just started in January with web development. Just trying to finish learning React right now. Just finished a React project. It was interesting and fun. So I'm interested in today dropping native React with Ionic. So should be great. I am looking for an internship or a job right now. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Okay, great. Let's go to the second row. We'll just go back and forth.
Sure. I'm Dale Richards. I own a digital offshore agency called App Creative. So we do a lot of serverless cloud stuff like AWS Lambdas. My developers are mostly Russian expats who have fled Russia. It was in the last year for countries like Thailand, or Georgia, or Turkey. And so we code stuff in AWS Lambda functions for clients here in the States. We have done a lot of React Native work, and so the headline for this meetup kind of grabbed my attention, so I wanted to come and learn more about Ionic. And that's it.
I'm Ben Callaghan. I live and work here in Lehigh. I work for a fintech company called Slater, just up the road.
I'm Artie Ordonez. I'm self-employed, self-taught, and I like to go to meetups and have some good time.
I'm Gino Ramo. I study here. I started last November, I think, for the web development, and we're just learning Ionic, so I came here to learn more. And Todd is the one teaching us. But yeah, he's teaching us, so I thought of coming and learning more. I'm also looking for an internship or something, or a job for it.
I'm Brooke. I'm also part of the same class, learning Ionic with Todd. I'm looking for an internship too, as part of graduating, so hopefully I find one within May. So.
I'm Slater. Went to Ionic meetups before COVID, so that's kind of it. But yeah, so I'm going to present here on the React Native stuff very shortly. But yeah, currently at a company called Parallel, just actually across the street.
I'm Jason. I work here at Untitled program coordinator for the program course.
My name is Simon. I'm here and learn that they're teaching. And I sometimes help out, mentor. Great to be here.
I'm Alfie, and I'm a mathematician who's been working as a software developer and really looking forward.
Cool.
I'm Jackson Bingham. I'm also in the August Tech Web Dev course. I'm also looking for an internship. I can do React and Vue.js. So.
Great.
And Angular.
Great. Yeah.
Last time we met and have a meetup, a JS meetup at Jane. Andrew said they're looking for me.
At Jane,
Yeah, Jane,
Jane's hiring.
yes. So look, if you know Andrew, just.
Jason's, I'm sure, taking notes back here.
What was the meetup again?
This is JS.
That was a Node.js meetup,
It's a JS right here. The people
And-
visit like once a month.
Yeah,
and it was at Jane's. Okay.
Yeah.
probably Utah JS, but
Utah JS.
Yeah.
there you go.
yeah.
Well, I can actually. It's probably gonna be,
Me and Jason help you get to it too.
You
Yeah.
can probably go to the meetup and contact the organizers.
They're in Slack, you can
Either
join.
in Slack.
Yeah, and on meetup.com.
So Todd, does MTech have like an intern program, or is it kind of just
Yeah.
unofficial and students have to go find their own, or are they?
It's, yes. Jason helps to recruit and get companies to do that, but it's up to them to match and find what they want to do
Yeah.
and not, yeah.
I mean, do companies come to MTech and say, hey, we're doing an internship?
There's a few
Yeah.
that we've got good communications with, but we're always looking for more,
Yeah.
especially lately. There's been a downturn
Yeah.
and budgets are tightened, but yeah, always looking for internships.
Okay.
Yes, Utah JS.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I think internships are fantastic. I encourage people to do that. I did that early in my career. It gives you a sense of where you want to work and where you don't want to work. So it's really good experience. So with that, any other questions? So it's about 6:30. We're gonna have Tyler is gonna present first, and then Ben following Tyler at 7, and then Q&A at 7:30. Okay, thanks.
Make sure you give a little more background too on how much you've done with Ionic.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, let me hook up first and see. 217, right?
Yeah, 217.
So we're gonna be doing a little bit of live demoing today, so we will pray to the demo gods. Okay, so I'm a terrible persuader. I'm gonna try to tell you guys the facts of using both React Native and Capacitor. So, who here has made a mobile app before? Okay. Who here has used React Native for that? Okay, we got one. Okay, let me start by going off a little bit of background, and then we'll dive into that. I just want to kind of understand how to present that. So, I'm Tyler Slater. I'm the CTO of a company called Parallel. We do headcount management. So if companies are in Series A or something and they're trying to expand, they can kind of make sure that they have the right headcount as they grow and go from there. So we're just across the street. Hopefully, as we grow our team, I can tap into this meetup as well and hire some people. But a little bit about me. So this is my wife. These are our dogs. She is much more of a dog person than I am. They look very stoic and angry about those bandanas, but they're usually very happy. And then I also love paragliding. So when the weather is nice, I'm a fair weather paraglider. So I like it when it's nice and warm, not when there's snow on the ground, like you see people that are crazy right now doing. So let's first start off by talking about kind of the problem that we're actually solving. Anytime you think of tools, there's always a holy war of what, this versus that. I like to take a step back and say, okay, what do we actually want to accomplish? So for Capacitor, Ionic, I'll say Ionic for now. We'll dive into the difference between those two. There's kind of this spectrum of what you need to accomplish, whether you're a startup or you're an enterprise app. And there's a lot of different needs on both sides of the spectrum. And historically, there's been a lot of adoption of React Native. And React Native is really good at, before I get into solutioning of that, when you're
when you're a startup, you have minimal resources. You have to deliver quickly. You don't want to have to keep switching between different apps. You want to keep things as simple as possible, because when you're building something to start, your goal is to determine, is this worth continuing to build? Do people actually want it? A lot of times it's very tempting to be, how can we build this as perfect as possible from the beginning? But then you just waste resources along the way. So when you're a company at scale, these companies in Lehigh, they start to change that perspective and say, okay, we want to deliver a really good experience for our customers. We have money to spend on it. There's ROI behind it. We can assign like dedicated teams to different problems and problem areas. So as these companies, wherever you fall on the spectrum, there's been this holy grail of development called cross-platform. And it's to be able to, instead of having different code bases for different things, you're able to consolidate it down into one code base in one place and say, this is where everything lives. You don't have multiple teams doing different things, but coding the same thing. For example, if you have an iOS app and an Android app, they really should do the same thing. But a lot of times, I've been on teams where Android was like so far behind iOS, and they just had to play catch up all the time. The experience wasn't as good. So what we're trying to solve here is to bring all those code bases together so that you have a singular code base that has a singular set of features, so that when you deploy something, it deploys to all the different platforms. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of evaluate that, and in choosing what's the right tool to use. So I tend to look at it from three scenarios. First, just compare the tools side by side. The second is betting on the right horse. So long term, what's going to be the right thing that sticks? Personally, I don't like picking something that like is cool and flashy, and it's like a perfect tool for the job, but won't get market adoption. Like people won't use it, so then you're kind of pigeonholed and you have a skill that's not transferable. And then last is, okay, once you implement it, are you going to be able to keep building quickly and not get stuck on certain things? If it's something that a lot of people don't adopt, then maybe you're the only one facing that bug. It's kind of a pain along the way. So like I said, there's a few options. Going back to kind of that spectrum again, there's a few options you can do, and probably the most popular one right now, I would say, is React Native. Now, let's say that you have a need where you have an app that has to be available on mobile and web. So iOS, Android, and web, 3 different platforms. There's a few different ways you can do it. Again, I'm terrible at persuading you, so I'm going to just tell you my experience and how I've used each one, and what I personally found to be the most preferable. So the first one is React Native and actually coding a separate web app. Now, you still have 2 code bases here. So there's a caveat to that. You could get React Native on web. It's a whole nother tangent that I wouldn't recommend. But if you want to build something, again, for point 2, which was betting on the long run, you would build it in React Native and you'd build a web app separately. A more common one at scale is to have 3 different code bases. You have your iOS app, you have your Android app, and you have your web app. So you have resources, you have teams, you can assign tons of different people to it. You can handle those problems with money and with people. So if you're a startup or even at scale, you can use the third alternative, which I'm going to talk about today, which is Capacitor. And it's a single code base for all 3. In fact, there's another host of this meetup that Corey, he'll be here. He might be here a little bit later, but I think he was working on an app where they were able to get an Apple Watch app is in there as well. So like it truly is cross-platform. You don't have to go with these multiple different platforms for every platform that you add to it. Capacitor truly delivers on that promise. So let's go back a little bit. First, I'll get to my experience with the different apps, but first let's go a little bit of history of, I know this is an Ionic meetup, and let me tell you what Capacitor is in the first place, because they're 2 different names, but they're made by the same company. So I wish I remembered the year. I think it was 2017. Is that when they split things? Maybe it's later. Yeah. So years ago, Ionic made the really good decision in my eyes to split their offering into a few parts, few products. One of them is Ionic, and if that's what you guys have been learning in class, Ionic is just you can imagine it just like components. You can drop them into your app, whether it's Angular, React. You could take these components and you can use them as components within those apps. The other side, so when you want to get something, and that's great for a mobile app, or sorry, for a web app, and that's for the UI layer of things. But when you want to take that app and put it onto a mobile app, that's where Capacitor comes in. So historically, there was something called Cordova, and Ionic came around. Ionic, the company, came along and said, "Hey, this is kind of outdated. It's kind of old. Let's create something newer, fresher, is able to be supported on more platforms." And they created Capacitor. So as I was going through this talk and trying to come up with a ton of convincing points, React Native and Capacitor are so similar. There's really just one difference, and I'll get into it. But let me kind of, I'm sorry to jump around a bit, but so I was previously at MX. I'm just going to go a little bit background of what ways that I've seen people try to address this cross-platform problem. MX, it's a banking app. They offer a mobile app for all their bank customers. So America First, I believe, is on here on MX. And their approach to this was using, they actually made a game engine. So instead of creating a mobile game, they used the same technologies and they created a mobile app. It's kind of overkill. I think they had about 2 years worth of bugs in their backlog. It wouldn't be my first choice. But there's a lot of these companies that are trying to solve for this. So my last startup as a CTO was called Beam. We used React Native. This was our app at the time. It was kind of a mixture of a personal finance management app as well as finding emergency resources near you. So we had like location data, we had push notifications, those types of things. We found it to be, although React Native is I would refer to as the industry standard for cross-platform, there was an immense amount of quirks to it. And it created this difficulty to work in it, and that made me kind of seek other options. And then this was before Capacitor even came along, so this was the best option at the time. And then the last one that I most recently worked on was called HomeQ, and this, I'll talk you through the kind of a case study of this later. But this was I don't want to spoil it, but this is just an overview of it. It's teledoc for a contractor, so they could diagnose something in your home, tell you. I think I called someone out and they told me to replace my air filter. So something as simple as that. That really could just be done over the phone. So let's start off with kind of comparing those tools. I said they were very, very similar. They truly are. They are as similar as they come, but with some quirks along the way. So you're able to write both in React. You're able to write, it's just React code. It's portable one to the other. That's totally fine. You're able to write code on the native layer. So this is super important when it comes to, as you expect to grow. Let's say you have an app that you want to get some more performance out and you have to write kind of a native plugin. Both React Native and Capacitor would allow you to go to the native layer. In fact, there's a plugin that I'm working on right now where I'm taking the code from React Native, their plugin that they wrote, and just porting it over to Capacitor. It's just native code, so there's some mapping we have to change, but at the end of the day, it's just native code on the base layer. They both are able to build for iOS and Android apps, and important that they are both open source, so you're able to kind of know that it's supported by a community as opposed to just a company. So, sorry to get into the differences. I don't want to rag on React Native, but so it's not all bad, but and it's kind of a repeat of certain things. But the biggest thing to me is that when you're dealing with the web versus React Native, there's a standards to it. So web has I'm trying to think of the term for that, but a committee that decides what actually happens within web portals or web apps, or not web apps, browsers like Chrome or Edge. They all kind of come together and they decide, hey, what are we actually going to support? What's it going to look like? With React Native, it's just Facebook. They own it. They can make whatever decisions they'd like. And that's, with enough community adoption, that's totally fine. But there is, I have a special place in my heart for web standards, and knowing that they're going to be around for a long, long time. They have a proven track record, and over time, it's just going to work out. So there's a quick little story behind that. So there's a company Facebook acquired. I wish I remembered the number, but it was like 80 million. I might just be making that up. But they acquired this company in around 2014, called Parse. And it was this backend as a service. It was a competitor to something called Firebase. And they acquired them. They have high hopes in them. 2 years later, they just shut it down. They said, this isn't where we want to focus our time. So not saying this is going to happen, but there is always a chance that they could decide, hey, we just don't want to pursue this anymore. They were kind enough to open source it at that point and say, you can host it yourself, you can run it yourself. But it was expensive for everyone that was on it to migrate it off onto their own things. And then you had to support it yourself. It is nowhere near to the adoption that it was then. It has since kind of petered off, but there's always that risk. So that's why web standards are kind of near and dear to my heart. So I said before on the previous slide, they could both build iOS and Android. And this is, like I said, there's a caveat to this. It can be built for web as well. There is a thing that allows React Native to be ported over the web, but it's kind of like converting it once and then twice so that you're ending up back to the web standards. You might as well just start with the web standards. And then the biggest difference between the two is their UI, their interface that you're coding in is an abstraction. So it's very complex under the hood. So they just give you something very simple to work with. Whereas Capacitor allows you just code in HTML. It's web, like I said, it's web standards all along the way. When you're dealing with that, and what we found as we were coding out that personal finance management app was that the speed of development was, we kept hitting bump after bump after bump when we were using React Native. Whether it was Android had this one quirk, or this looks slightly different on different devices. But Apple and Google have gotten really good at making sure that websites look the same across the board. So that translates over to when you're building mobile apps in Capacitor. So let's move on to the second point, betting on the right horse. So a few different ways that I evaluate this. First one is there a long-term vision? Is there a company that's backing it that says, hey, here's where we want to take it, and here's where we are today, and are they open and transparent about that? From what I've seen in the Capacitor community, they're very open and transparent about that. Over time, the React Native side of things has kind of petered off. It doesn't have that momentum, at least from my perspective. This is, again, take this with a huge grain of salt, that this is all my perspective. And I'd love to learn from you guys as well if you have different experiences. But I've seen that the long-term vision is there with Capacitor, so that makes sense to me. There is ongoing support and community behind it. They're continuing to build new features, new plugins. They have a community plugins repository that you can add your own plugins to that other people can leverage. And then I'll keep coming back to this. It's based on standards. So things that are based on standards will last longer. I can say that confidently. Don't have to put any qualifiers to that. So then the last point, your ability to build quickly and keep building. So you want to be able to deliver something quickly, but then not get stuck on, because we built it that way, now we have these quirks to handle. Regardless of the tools that you pick, you could end up with this as a problem if you don't build well from the beginning. But I found that if you're building something with something you're more familiar with, so web technologies, then you're able to architect it better, you're able to structure it better, and there's much more resources for you on the website than there are on the React Native side. So as you get something as you build something, you start off by coding it. You then have to go through and test it. And then after that, you have to eventually get it to production. It's pretty basic lifecycle stuff. Testing there are so many more tools for testing on web that I found that allow it to be a much more seamless experience. So one of the things that we found in this, and I'll talk about it more in kind of the case study side of it. But as you're going through this iteration on things, if it's only a mobile app, replicating bugs can be a huge pain. You have to get it running on the device. You just have a little less insight, and maybe a developer that's better than me might be able to get to those things quicker. But I found that when we're comparing debugging on web to debugging on mobile, it's a night and day difference. So when I was building this last app, I was able to code it with the kind of the capacitor direction. I was able to code it out, code it in web, get all my functionality there, and then I was able to tack on the plugins. I was able to tack on push notifications and at some point a video plugin. But I didn't have to do all that on the phone and wait for it to rebuild. So it allowed me to kind of develop that development lifecycle was much faster. Like I said, testing, there's a lot more resources there. And then supporting in production, there's a plethora of tools for supporting a web application. So let's kind of dive into kind of the real world experience of each of these. Like I said, so my biggest experience when we were building out this app was, let's talk about requirements. So we started off, the problem that we're trying to solve was be able to, it was basically a survey. That's all we needed to build. And so we built it in a mobile app. And we built these extra features like the budgeting side and everything. And then I think a month before it was expected to be completed for the university, they said it's available on web, right? That wasn't a rhetorical question, or that was a rhetorical question. They were telling us it had to be available on web. So I said, shoot. And we ended up doing this kind of hacky thing where we said, okay, if we're going to be able to build it web, we don't want to have to build it twice. So what we did was this entire tab in the app was a web view. It popped up and it was our web app. So we built it once, we built it on web, and then we just ported it into mobile. We didn't need offline mode or anything like that. So it worked for the time being. The funny thing is that eventually, actually, one other thing. So remember when I mentioned MX and let me go back to this. MX and how difficult it was to build this in the game engine. How much can I share? Half of the app is web views. So they face the same problem. They can't build fast enough. So they have to say, okay, well, if you want that, you build it, we'll port it in. So you end up following kind of the same problem or the same resolution. No one wants to hack. No one wants to finish the app and have it be hacky along the way. So it's not fun. Proud of what you built. So the funny thing is that eventually they trimmed down, and I think they're just on web now. It's been a couple of years since I've been with them, but so I think they moved away from the mobile app completely. It's just a web platform now. Now, if they had capacitor, they could still provide it on web mobile without any difficulty. I wish I built into this talk just spinning up a capacitor application. Maybe we have extra time because it is so quick. Okay, so this might be pedantic, but this is the smallest example that I can kind of come up with. This is React Native. This is the web. And, a lot of times we think, oh, capacitor, like there's complexity to that. When you get into the plugins, that's the difference. So how things are interacted with. But when you're writing out UI, when you're writing out the core of your app is not push notifications. The core of your app is everything else that takes forever to build, to get the specifications right and whatnot. So you want that to be able to be quickly done, quickly developed. So as you look here, one of the things that drove me crazy was this is not CSS. It looks like it. It is just off enough to make you crazy. So I just had to look up every single time. Okay, what is it? What's the, because we were coding in web and React Native, so that context switching between them was a little tough. So we had to look up, okay, how do you do this? How do you do that? This is just CSS. If you guys have experience with Tailwind, that's a whole nother thing. Clean that up too. But and then, as I said, they abstracted away divs or buttons or anything like that. You had to use views and texts, which created its own level of complexity. There's quirks galore in that. As you're trying to match a design, there's limitations, for example, on Android of things extending past a boundary and whatnot. So you find those quirks along the way. With web, I'm sure there's quirks everywhere, but with web, there's much more support in that, and the people everyone else has run into in the past. So let me this is where we get into the live demo part. So I took on a project of 6 months ago, maybe more, called HomeQ. It was that video chatting app, and they came to me with a native iOS app, and then they came to me asking for a Android app. And I said, I can build it. Like I've written in Kotlin before. Is this really going to solve your business need? And they're a startup with no customers yet. So we kind of went to the drawing table and said, could we do this better? Let's take a step back instead of coming to me and saying, this is exactly what you want. Let me tell you what your options are. Because they were not technical people at all. So we went back to the drawing table and I said, hey, what if we instead built it as a web app, made it available to everyone instead of just people with phones. And then after that, we can port that over to a mobile app. And that's exactly what we did. So we got to the point with them. They're not in the App Store yet, but we got to a point where we were able to quickly build out the web app. Let's do a little coding demo, or not coding demo, but a little live demo and see. This is all test data. So so I was able to just spin this up. I believe most of them are Ionic components. So again, Ionic is just the component side of it. Capacitor is taking all this and dumping it onto a mobile app. But within here, we were able to test all these things, send the chat, do a video call. Let's see if this works. Okay. So when you're using Capacitor, forgetting things, in the same way that you want to tap into native plugins, you write the code once and it's able to tap into the web APIs, like your camera and your microphone, or it's able to tap into your phone's camera and microphone. You don't have to write code multiple times, at least if the plugin's built well. So it allows you to, it's almost as if web is a separate deployment or a separate platform it is. But in this case, yeah, so I just interfaced with that plugin and said, yeah, pull the camera permissions, pull the microphone permissions, and it would show a different thing on mobile, show the native plugin. But this is the native, you can view this as the native plugin for requesting those permissions. So we said to them, they were really concerned, hey, it works. Let's not do that. I don't want to see myself. They were really concerned about performance. They said, if we go web, I've seen it glitchy in the past. So I was able to say to them, makes perfect sense. First off, being a startup, let's just test it. Get it out there, see what works, see what doesn't. It's using Twilio under the hood. They're really good. I'm not coding that from scratch. So they handle that performance. Now, there is a chance that at the end of the day, it still isn't performant enough for them. They want a really polished experience. So they want to go further on that spectrum of polish and resources. And I basically gave them that escape hatch. Okay, if we really need to, we can write that native plugin. And that to me is super powerful because they have this plan in place of how they're going to grow, how they're going to get to far into their users' numbers without needing to change platforms, without needing to go native iOS, native Android. So basically what I said to them is we can write a plugin, we can write our own custom plugin, because I don't think Twilio has one yet, to where a capacitor drills down to the Twilio layer and uses their SDK, to their Twilio SDK at the native layer. So when I said they're very similar, React Native and Ionic, they're very similar. The difference comes in that UI layer and the complexities behind that, and in hitching yourself to something that isn't a standard, but it has a lot of adoption. So, like I said, I'm here to give you my experience, my facts, not necessarily try to convince you in one way or another. But a lot of people think that choosing something like Capacitor or Ionic is going to pigeonhole them it is as far from that as possible. So, yeah, last finishing point on that, and going back to kind of that holy grail of the cross-platform holy grail, that's ideally exactly where capacitor falls. I think it kind of gets that cross-platform. A little cheesy, but
You made a sound with that.
I know. Oh, you just I forgot that. How could I? So yeah, capacitor really does that cross-platform really well. Whereas from my perspective, the other tools come up a little bit short on that. So yeah, that's everything. Any questions?
Thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah, I got be some questions, no questions. And also, could you pull up YouTube and go to this and see if, because we're live streaming and I couldn't, I was gonna have my laptop available to watch YouTube myself, but had issues with recording.
So would you ever use, I mean, knowing you have Ionic or capacitor, would you ever make a choice to do React Native, or now that you know what you know?
So I guess one of the things I did touch on was I feel like in that spectrum, React Native solved, in my eyes, a problem that didn't quite exist. They're smack dab in the middle of that spectrum. React Native is good for performance. Their whole thing is we're going to take this button or this input and make it native. So instead of using a web view at all, React Native is like a native button and a native input. And there's some performance increases with that, but I feel like it leaves gaps on the other ends of the spectrum. It leaves gaps on, from my experience, from the very beginning when you're building something out, your speed to develop. And then it leaves gaps on the higher end. One of the stories I left out was Airbnb decided a few years ago to move off of React Native onto native on iOS and Android. Now, of course, they're big enough, like, of course they're going to do that. But they felt like the promises of, hey, you write this once, it works everywhere, kind of fell short. So I feel like React Native is right in the middle of that spectrum. And if you're a large enough company and you want to have a web team and a React Native team, you could. Would I? No.
Yeah.
I haven't had a situation where that would be the right fit. But again, I'm just stupid loyal to web standards.
Yeah. That's
So-
so important.
It's tough.
How about with the plugins? Are they, like capacitor when it first came out, it had a handful of plugins and then it's slowly been growing. Would you say they're equivalent as far as the coverage of the native between Android and Apple, that they cover all the main hardware devices they need?
Yes, I mean for the base cases that you need, I ran into one where it doesn't have the native Twilio, so it's a specific vendor.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a native SDK for Twilio. That's fine. I mean, I could use it in a web, like I said, but if I really wanted to, I could drill down to that layer. So I think because it's definitely not as big as React Native, there's less plugins, but I would be surprised if you ran into any of those limitations. It's just kind of a one-off. And then the companies that care about that performance are going to have a little more resources to be able to allocate, build their own plugin, contribute to the community. But there's tons of plugins, mostly community plugins on both sides. And on top of that, Cordova has been around for years, and Capacitor is made to be backwards compatible with Cordova. So it pulled in all those legacy plugins. They're potentially a little slower, but they should cover all the cases. So yeah,
Right.
I'd be surprised if there was any. I'd love to hear a case where it's needed, but
That was the complaint with Cordova, is that some worked okay and then others didn't, and then when you moved it from Android or Apple to Android, it doesn't work in Android.
yeah, Capacitor's been a lot better at that. It'll kind of let you know if it's supported up front.
Yeah.
But historically, there's a lot of bad rap that has to get fixed over time with that, because when you're dealing with so many starter apps, there's so many bad apps out there that someone spun up, and then people look at it and say, oh, this must be a bad tool because someone used it, but they used it at the very beginning. They weren't optimizing for performance.
Yeah.
So if someone truly did optimize for performance, it's a comparable tool.
Great.
Right.
Does look like YouTube's working this fine. Okay, thanks. Any questions you see on there? In the chat? Let's see, check on. I don't know. Or it should show you too how many people are watching right now. Might not be any, but we last month we got views after the fact. People want.
Oh, I guess I should probably put a contact. So don't follow me on Twitter. I'm not there. Where am I? I have terrible socials. You can just email me, tyler@getparallel.com. So if you're watching it after the fact or have questions, shoot me an email there. Or I'm in the meetup. You can always chat in the meetup later. A lot of different ways. So awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Now we've got 7 dinners left in there. So if you would like some more, please, let's just take like a 2 or 3 minute break while Benjamin gets set up for his presentation. And there's a restroom just right next to us right here too. Yeah, we'll have him start in about 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah.
Actually, I have a question for you.
Yep.
So for a beginner like like me.
Yeah.
Do I need to learn React to learn capacitor? Or I can just go straight to capacitor? JavaScript, HTML. I don't do any other framework. I like vanilla JavaScript.
Yeah, that's fine. So they, when they said they split their products, before that, they were really tied to Angular. They were really tied to Cordova. They had like everything very tight. After that, they said, okay, use whatever you want. We don't know the future. Put it in whatever framework or vanilla JS that you want. And they really hitched the wagon to like the web standard side. So, have you heard of web components?
Yes.
So
I have those.
Cool.
I like that rather than.
Yeah. So Ionic, I mean, they are just web. Like the Ionic framework is just web.
Yeah.
If you want to use it in React, they put a little wrapper around it.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day,
But
like,
sometimes the web component for iOS, sometimes they don't.
like on mobile,
Yeah.
the PWA. I'm less familiar with PWA.
So they're like, this is not working for us. The iOS part.
But it works on the browser.
Yes. Desktop works, Android works. But iOS, Apple, sometimes good.
You met Corey. The other He's on but there's definitely quirks. What's interesting is that Apple is a version used. They created the concept of PWA, then they abandoned it. We haven't put much blood last, and then Google picked it up like years later. So it's funny that they don't support it as much. They came up with it.
Yeah, Corey, he writes everything. No one else.
I don't even want to use those.
Stencils is more needed.
They've also got 2 shelves of swag over here, a bunch of stickers, Ionic socks, pins.
Yeah.
Got Ionic and Varus pins.
See, it's different syntax.
A lot of stickers,
You
socks,
still need to.
webcam covers. And there's even a couple magnets of Ionic on their mascot. Stickers, and then there's, feel free to open those up and look through those. These are computers, they just kind of themed. These, I haven't even opened these yet, but look at Pokemon. We're doing Pokemon, yeah. That's an extra small. That's from NGCon.
Those are cool.
Eurodips, gave me a bunch of swag to give out to students. Yeah, you need one? It's a hub. Yeah. And then you have, she got the last one.
Yeah,
I have a hub there.
Oh, yeah.
I told you about it. I was trying to find the movie.
Awesome.
So,
Let's see, does this say if there's any?
I literally searched it up once because I forgot.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, good. No one else besides us commenting so far.
Yeah, I know my dad's been trying to get in, but he's been having troubles on his end just trying to find it.
Okay, meetup.com. Well, you're presenting now, you can't tell them this. And my computer's in use, so I can't tell him. But yeah, you search for Ionic Utah on YouTube and go to the live tab. It's hidden under the live tab. But it's recorded.
Okay.
Live is fun.
You'll see it eventually.
Yeah.
They're almost like, we don't want to.
Part of the reason we update is they're also.
It's almost, they almost look like you're gonna use DJ. Yeah.
That's really my competitor.
Oh.
It's just, it's funny because it's not so much more about probably will. But this one is much. Yeah, hopefully.
Okay, Ben, go ahead when you're ready.
Whatever works for them.
So I'm going to demo today an app that I made several years ago, and I've been keeping it up to date over the years. This application is written with Capacitor and with Firebase, and Tyler just gave us a fantastic overview of Capacitor, so we can skim through that part. But these two tools allow us to build real-time, data-centric mobile applications. First, a little bit about me. My name is Ben Callaghan. I'm a software engineer at Select Bank Card. We're a fintech company here in Lehigh. I have more than 10 years of Microsoft.NET experience, and I'm a certified Microsoft Azure developer. So clearly, I'm here to talk about Google Angular and Google Firebase. But I've been an enthusiast of Angular ever since its AngularJS days. I've used it to build a variety of mobile and web applications, including Organ Stops, the application that I'm going to demo today. And fun fact, as of this weekend, I have participated in setting the Guinness World Record.
At the Provo Mall.
Yep, you've heard of it.
I guessed it.
The record was the largest D&D campaign ever, Dungeons and Dragons. 1,227 players. You can reach me on Twitter or on Discord if you like. I know the Ionic community is pretty big on Discord. And that's how they found me for this, actually. So, just once again, Capacitor is a bridge that allows you to write JavaScript web applications, but connect them to native device features. Most of the code that you write in a Capacitor app will be inside of a web view, but through Capacitor's plugins, you can break free to access all of the native APIs that you would normally want in a true mobile app. And note that Capacitor creates truly native apps at the end of the day, which means you can upload them to the Google Play Store or to the Apple App Store. Moving on, Firebase is the biggest part of the app I'm going to show you. It is a cloud offering. It's part of the Google Cloud Platform, but it's smaller and more focused on common app development requirements, such as web hosting or file storage or database or serverless functions. It has analytics, authentication, push notifications. If you're building a mobile app and you need a backend server, Firebase probably has you covered. And
While it is a commercial product, it does have paid tiers. It does have a very generous free tier. And for its web hosting, you can have up to 10 gigabytes of web hosting. And push notifications are always free. In fact, the app I'm going to show you has been on the free tier since 2017. I have not put a penny into that app. So there's 4 pillars that my app Organ Stops is built on. Ionic, which you're all familiar with, Capacitor, which we just learned about, Angular to try and keep it all organized, and Firebase as the backend. These 4 all serve different functions, but they're all big players. And to talk to each other, they need big libraries. So Ionic and Angular, obviously they've got this glue layer that works really well. Angular Fire is officially maintained by the Angular team to help connect back to the Firebase platform. And there is a set of third-party plugins that are well established at this point called Capacitor Firebase. As the name suggests, it's a set of capacitor plugins that talk to Firebase. Now, Google has published many SDKs for Firebase. They have a web SDK. They have a native Android SDK. They have a native iOS SDK. The Capacitor Firebase plugins let you use the native SDK for your platform, all from a common web standard. Now, I've mentioned it several times already, but I am the maintainer of Organ Stops. As you can see from the picture on the right, organs have a lot of buttons. I don't know about you, but I don't know what all those buttons do. There are too many of them. And my mom is a volunteer organist at her church, and she would often get asked to play the organ on Sundays with very little notice. She did not have the time to experiment with all of these buttons and figure out which ones make the song the best. And you can't just have one arrangement for your organ. Some songs require a softer tone. Others demand loud brass sections. You really have to play with it. So I wrote this app for my mom so that whenever she found an arrangement she liked, she could upload it into a crowdsourced database. And if other people found arrangements they liked, they could upload it into the database as well. And if my mom's running a short on time, they just called her up last minute, she could pull up my app, say, oh, we're going to sing Silent Night this week. And she'd be able to pull up exactly which organ stops to use that day. So within organ stops, it's primarily just a collection of songs, and each song has a sub-collection of arrangements. Users are allowed to upload new songs. Users are allowed to add new arrangements to existing songs. Users are allowed to edit and delete their own submissions, and they can also copy other people's arrangements as a starting point. To make all this happen, I use 2 main features from Firebase. The first is Firebase authentication, so I know who's logged into the app. I don't want people deleting other people's data. That would be bad. Firebase allows you to do standard email password authentication. It lets you do Facebook authentication, Google, Twitter. I think GitHub is one of them. There's a whole bunch that you can choose from, but it does so through a single standardized interface for all platforms. So it navigates the Google OAuth system for you. It navigates Facebook's complex consent system. It stores the password safely so you don't have to. And once the user is authenticated, that identity token can be passed around to all of the other Firebase products, allowing you to have a consolidated identity model for both authentication and authorization. Using that model, I'm able to set security rules within the Firebase database that allows it to say users can edit their own things, users can add new collections, but users aren't allowed to delete songs. That's an admin feature, only I can do it. And that brings us to the real-time database. Firebase has multiple databases that they offer, multiple database products. They have Firestore, and they have the real-time database. Not going to talk about Firestore too much, but it's a document collection style of database. What I used for organ stops is the real-time database. It's a NoSQL database. In fact, they store all the data as a single JSON document, just one massive JSON blob. But you're allowed to dig into that and say, you know what, I just want this small piece today. Or I'm only going to update this section. So it gives you a lot of fine-grained control, despite the fact that you only have one table in your database. Now, the real-time database, as the name implies, can automatically synchronize data. When you send in a query, you can say, oh, I just want the data one time. Or you can say, I'm going to run this query and let me know whenever the data changes so I can update my web view. The real-time database finally also includes an offline cache. So if you temporarily lose connectivity, it can operate off of the cache. If you edit a document while you're offline, the SDK will automatically remember those changes and submit them back to the server the next time you're online. Now, that's enough slides. Why don't we take a look at the application itself? That too small? Can everyone see that? That didn't help. Maybe if I change, it sort of helped. So this is the main page of the application. These are all real songs that people have crowdsourced for me. You want to know how many songs I uploaded into this app? 0. I didn't create any of these. These were all created by real users. And at last count, I had over 1,000 registered users. This app has never been marketed. I put it on the app stores, maybe a couple Facebook posts. That was it. So you can see here, these are all songs. We can sort by number, because in the church hymnal, they all have a unique number. A lot of people say, oh, we're going to do hymn 201 today. Or if you prefer, you can sort them by title. And let's take a look at this one, Joy to the World. You can see here's an arrangement that my mom uploaded. It's a list of all the organ stops she thought sounded good. But maybe you've got a different opinion. Some people have their own taste. Some people like the song louder or quieter. You can swipe to the side to get other people's ideas. Or maybe you think this one's good, but it just needs a little bit of tweaking. Like, it really needs more flute. You got to have more flute. So we can set that, add the flute, hit save. And if we scroll all the way to the end, well, you can see it's starting to peek out there, but it won't quite go. That's weird. Let's try that again, one more time. And there it is. There's my new submission. But, who am I to say? I'm not a professional organist. I have no idea if flute is the right instrument for there. So let's just get rid of that. And it's gone. So, taking a look at some of the code for this. Here it is. This is, as I said earlier, an Angular application that's using just a little bit of capacitor and a little bit of Firebase. This is the code for that main songs page. The way that Firebase does its real-time reactivity is with RxJS, with observables. So here on this main page, I'm watching for that segment bar at the top, the one that said number or title. Whenever that changes, I want to go out to the database and I want to run a query. First, I need a reference to the object I want to pull out. In this case, I want to open the database and I want to grab the hymns object. I want to sort it by whatever I pulled out in the title bar, number or title. And I'm going to run a query. And because this is an observable, it's just going to fire every time it changes. If one of you were to pull out your phones and add a new song, while I was sitting here watching it, I would be able to see it pop up right in the middle of the screen. Or, if you did number 200 right in the middle of the screen, or just the list would automatically update. And now looking at the song page where we could see all of the individual arrangements, again, I'm using RxJS. I'm grabbing the hymns unique identifier from the route params. And every time that changes, I'm going out to the database and saying, hey, give me the hymn with that ID and fetch it for me. And again, it's all reactive. But perhaps most interestingly is the edit page. So on the edit page, I need a view model. That's what this edit object is. Once again, I'm getting the hymn key out of the route params. If the hymn key doesn't exist, must be a brand new song. So we're just going to populate it with an empty song. If it does exist, I'm going to go to the database. I'm going to, once again, grab the hymn. And I'm going to query for it and watch that query for changes. Now, when the save button's clicked, it uses the Firebase SDK again to look up the hymn, look up the arrangement that I'm editing, and it's going to post back. The Firebase SDK is a little wonky in that all of your queries are done with RxJS, but all of your mutations are done with promises. So it takes a little bit of getting used to switching from one to the other. And finally, let's show off authentication. You can see that I'm currently signed in. Let's sign out so we get a better feel for that. Sign in. In my app, I chose to support Google, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as just a standard email password authentication. Again, I don't store that password. Yeah, it's not my job. I don't want to deal with that. Passwords are hard. You get that wrong, your company is sunk. So I'm letting Google do it. I figure Google knows what they're doing. They've been around long enough. So I'm going to sign back in here. Note that I was already signed in, so it didn't take very long. I got redirected, and there's my name. Anybody have any questions?
So how does it populate the number? Does the person that uploaded the song put the number?
Yes. In fact, let's take a look at this page. If you wanted to create a new song, I ask you for the number, I ask you for the title, and all the organ stops that you want to include.
So do you use the Firebase authentication specifically kind of comes with it? Just so all the Google stuff, you just include that in your app and it's the Firebase extension that comes right with it.
Yeah, so it's part of the Firebase SDK.
Yeah.
And let's take a look at that code. So I have this authentication service, and this is where you're going to see more capacitor, because I don't just want to use the Firebase web SDK. I want to use the Android SDK if I'm on an Android phone, the iOS SDK if I'm on an iOS phone. So here you can see, oh, they want to sign in with email and password? Great. I'm going to use the capacitor plugin to sign in with the email and password. And then I'm going to synchronize that login back with the web view. It's kind of a quirk with the capacitor plugin that if you're in a pure web scenario, The capacitor plugin just uses the Firebase Web SDK, all works as expected. But if you're on an Android or an iOS device, it logs in with the Android and iOS SDK, and the Web SDK actually has no idea who the user is. So I wrote this service to just keep them in sync. And you can see here, this is what it looks like to sign in with Google. That's it. It's one line. Sign in with Google.
You can also use Node.js to do that, right?
Node.js is more for server applications. This all runs in the web browser.
On the server side, you can also write that code so you don't have to create an authentication. It's just going to be all in the server. Design in the server side.
I'm not sure. Firebase is primarily for mobile applications. I don't know offhand if Firebase authentication can be used with custom servers. Certainly worth looking into.
I think that's one of the selling points of Firebase. So you don't really need a Node.js server takes that place.
Exactly. I just showed you authentication. I showed you a database, and there's no server here. It's just the web app talking to Firebase.
What was the biggest issue you ran into?
Possibly one of the biggest issues I ran into this application was I wrote it in 2017. Capacitor didn't exist then. This started as a Cordova app. When I converted it to Capacitor, I basically threw it all out the window and started over. I kept the database, and that was about it. But this authentication was kind of tricky as well. Not on this app, but on a similar one I wrote, I had a problem where the authentication calls were hanging. They didn't fail. They didn't throw an error. They just never returned. And that was really difficult to debug. And I eventually found out that I'd been passing the wrong initialization parameters, and that I was just using a configuration that worked on Android and web, but not on iOS. iOS has been the bane of my existence ever since I started doing mobile development. Whole reason I bought a Mac was to do iOS development. Otherwise I don't touch it.
So there are other parts of your app that use capacitor, or mostly just the authentication piece, or?
Really just the authentication piece for this application. I've got another one, which unfortunately is still in private testing, so I can't show it off, but it uses the capacitor share API. So, you know, that little button that you get at the bottom of some screens, like, oh, I want to share this with my friends, and it pulls up a list of text message contacts, or I want to share it to Facebook. That's one line with capacitor.
I was just saying that if you're building native, really the only thing you need when signing into Firebase is Google or Apple sign in. If you're signing in with web, you could still just use the web sign in right there. Yeah. Like I use Firebase UI, which they give you a login page with forgot password and everything. Yeah. And the only part that doesn't work is sign in with Google or sign in with Apple, which you'd have to do anyway, like you're doing.
Yeah, in addition to all of these SDKs, Firebase provides a pre-built UI for your login page that's customizable, and you can say, oh, well, I really only want Google and Facebook, and it will turn off the Twitter button. Or I want all of them, and it'll figure all that out for you. This login page is actually a custom one that I wrote because I couldn't get Firebase UI working. There was a whole bunch of version issues, like Angular had just updated, but Firebase hadn't updated to catch up. And might be worth going back to because this was a pain to write. And trying to match Facebook and Twitter's strict brand guidelines for how I'm allowed to use their logos is tough.
I like that.
I wonder if you could pull up the capacitor plugin list on the I'm probably on capacitor.js.
So So,
top plugins.
oh, yep, it's right at the top.
Just to give people more idea about.
So Capacitor has a long list of official plugins and community plugins. Here's the official plugins. It doesn't fit on my screen. But here we have, a pretty basic one, the camera plugin. Got one that lets you access the file system, one for geolocation. They actually have a Google Maps plugin now, which was a seriously difficult endeavor for them. If you wanted to pull up Google Maps natively and use the native Google Maps, which is a little bit cheaper. Native Google Maps is cheaper than web Google Maps. Ran into that in a commercial project once. Boss was not happy with how much we racked up.
How are the community ones? Are they pretty good or are they buggy?
So I've actually used some of the community plugins. The Capacitor Firebase plugins that I just showed off that I've been using in organ stops, those are community driven. They're from the Cap Awesome team. So we can actually take a look at that Capacitor Firebase. So these are all the Firebase plugins that they support. They support Firebase Analytics, Firebase Authentication, Firebase Cloud Messaging, which is their push notification system. Oddly, they don't support either of Firebase's database solutions, so you still have to use the Web SDK. But the Web SDK for the database seems to work just fine, even when running on a native device. I did run into some troubles using the pure web authentication SDK, but when I pulled in the Capacitor plugin, it simplified everything. Just went down to one line of code.
Y'all done that?
Yep.
Yeah, but we got any more questions? A lot of good questions. Yeah.
So those organ, I don't know anything about organ, but is that, all those settings are just known so you can put them in your app, or are there new settings that people have to come up with that you didn't know about?
So that's actually been a common complaint on the app. If you go to the Google or Apple app stores, this app is not reviewed very favorably. And the biggest complaint is that, here, let me log in again so I can show you.
There's no way to add stops that are not already in there.
Correct. So if you're looking at this list, this is it. I created a list of stops and it's not scrolling today. That's sad. It does show a scroll bar, but it's not scrolling today.
Go out of the mobile mode, back in, or reload or something.
There you go.
Yeah.
So what I did was I took a picture of the organ that my mom used, specifically the one organ she had access to, and I copied all of the stop names from that organ. And it's a very common complaint that you can't add or remove any of these stops because every organ is just a little bit different.
So are you gonna add a feature where people can add new stop names?
It's on the bucket list. Another thing I'd like to do is you can see that this is a very long list and it's not organized very well. I originally designed it just for the church hymns I thought my mom was going to be playing. There's no way this is going to be popular. 1,000 users later and people are uploading like Beethoven pieces. And that's cool, but where do you put them without this being a jumbled mess?
I mean, there's so many cool things that you could do with this product in terms of connecting with, like there's the American Guild of Organists, and they have Untitled Chapter. You can connect with so many users to get input on what features they would find valuable. I mean, you have people that are really enthusiastic about the organs that you could monetize this app. I mean, there's so many different things you can do with it. It's just the fact that you have stumbled upon a user base that is so enthusiastic enough to go and complain about it. That means something. You can do something with that.
Yep. Another feature that I found in a negative review is if you're not an organist, do you have any idea what it's going to sound like if you mix choral bass 4 with mixture 3? They wanted a demo button where you set the stops you like and it plays a few notes.
I just read the review.
Yeah.
Cool. Literally that same review.
There's not a capacitor plug-in for that, huh?
Not that I'm aware of.
But you can put filters for principals versus woodwind, versus winds versus string stops. Like there's so many cool things.
Yep. And now we're getting into audio mixing, which I don't know anything about.
Maybe trying to chat GPT a little.
What's it sound like?
That new AI bot that mimics people's voices and creates new songs.
That's cool. That's really cool.
It's also recent.
Yeah. All right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
What is your name again?
Ben Callaghan.
Ben
Do you
Callaghan.
want to wrap it up?
Yep. How do I turn this off?
Let's click on it, I think. Click on the blue, yeah. Yep.
There it goes.
Hey, well, thanks. That was 2 great presentations, and yeah, we're always looking for presenters. So if you've got an app to present or an idea to share, just let us know, and we'll get you on the schedule. Do we have one scheduled for next month yet?
I don't have it on the calendar yet, but we've been the 4th Tuesday?
Yeah.
So that's our target, but we'll slide it, depending on holidays and other conflicts. But, and our first choice is the conference room downstairs where maybe you came in on that end, the west side of this building. There's something else going on tonight, but it'll either be down there or up here. These are always available, so.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll put the MTech students on the spot. But in our past meetups before COVID, we would frequently have, some of the teams, they do an Angular, what's it called, something project, your capstone project. And if you choose Ionic to do that, I would pull real hard and recruit you. Just come, like he did, like Ben did. Pull it up on the screen, show what you did, dig into the code a little bit, answer questions, and people eat it up.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a great way to learn to present, and future employers can see what you've done. And
so keep that in mind. And you got a little more time to prepare.
Me and Aaron, I think, are going to do it in Ionic. So.
Yeah, good.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We'll see everyone next month.